All right. Well, welcome to the Wednesday of week two. We're going to go back and we're going to be talking about stakeholders some more and a few concepts. And then I've got something that we touch on briefly in the notes in my lecture notes here, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper into it for you, but not that deep. I think that you'll find it quite interesting. Howie, I think you're drawing on my screen. I don't know how you did that, but that was cool. Huh. Okay. Well, what do I know? Anyway, your textbook, My Buyers of Stanberry, discussed corporate social responsibility, CSR. We mentioned that last week. They brought this up while looking specifically at unique stakeholders. Now, unique stakeholders include the groups that we wouldn't normally associate as being stakeholders of our organization, such as society, the environment, and the government. So these are unique in the sense of they are stakeholders, but they're not a direct stakeholder. They're not an employee or a customer or a leader or an investor. And this is not fun. Give me a second. I got to fix this. Huh. Try this. Okay, so what is limited liability? Your textbook defines limited liability as being the owners, meaning the shareholders or stockholders of corporations, as well as the directors and managers, and they are protected by the laws, stating that in most circumstances, their loss in case of business failure cannot exceed that amount they paid for their shares of ownership. And so limited liability applies, yes, it's a form of organizational legal framework, but it's also certain stakeholders have limited liability, meaning if our corporation tanks or we wind up getting sued, our investors and the people who put money into it are only liable financially up to the point of what they've invested. They're not liable for any more than that. So we can see that limited liability is designed to separate the financial burden carried by the investors. This same level of protection can also be seen in limited liability companies. So if you go to form a company, a business, you can have a sole proprietorship, which means you have it all. And if it tanks, pretty much you're tanking. You can have a partnership, like an LPC. You can have an LLC, a limited liability company. You can have a for-profit corporation, which has 100 or more investors, 101 or more investors. And if you have 91 to 100 investors, you have a privately held company. And the difference between the two is that the privately held company doesn't have to report to the SEC, or they don't have to file anything that goes to the public as far as their finances. If you're a publicly traded company, so you have 101 or more investors, shareholders, then you are required to submit, depending on the level you're at, quarterly and annually, sometimes monthly, reports to the SEC. And annually, you need to disclose your annual report. And a lot of companies do that on their website. So if you're looking up a company that's publicly held, you can look on their webpage and you can look through the site. Sometimes you have to use a site map to do this, but you can find their annual report typically on their page. If you're using that as a source for something you're working on, that is considered credible. That is top tier source because it has been verified and vetted by external agencies and has been submitted to the SEC. Or you can go to, have I shown you guys how to use Edgar yet? The SEC Edgar? I don't think I have. We have a moment. We can do that real quick. Let me drop this screen down, go back to Zoom, stop this share, and do another share real quick. Let me get another screen open. Okay, and sometimes I feel like I need more than two monitors. Okay, let me share this screen. Okay, good. And here we are. It's up. So what you do is you type in EDGARSEC. And it takes you right here. You get the sec.gov search filings. And we can go to the Edgar search assistance. And from here, we get to access into their data. So let's do search some filings. Let's do a full text. Let's look up ARBYS. Arby's. Okay, Arby's Restaurant LLC. We can pull that up and they have not filed. Okay, let's find one that has filed then. Let me go back here and just come into this one. There we go. That's more like it. Okay. So let's put in MC McDonald's Corporation. I know they file. Right here, I can pull up their 8K, which is their current reports. I can pull up their 10K, which are annual reports, their 10Q, which are quarterly reports, their proxies for the annual meetings, ownership disclosures. So let's pull up an annual report. Let's pull up November of 2025. That's a 10Q. Okay, we'll do this one, February. They just filed it. Here you can get all kinds of information. Now you're going to have a couple hundred pages at times, sometimes maybe a little bit less, but typically 77 to like a couple hundred pages. You can, there's an error. Nice. Try it this way. Oh, here we go. Okay. Go to their 10K. This one happens to be, I can't see how many pages it is. It's hiding on my screen. Anyway, we can go through here and we can see everything that they had to post to the SEC. You can get all the different reports. There's usually a table of contents. You can look through financial statements. You can look through what they're doing throughout the environment. You can find about employees, what benefits they're offering, what changes they've made, and there is a wealth of information. Now, we could also go to McDonald's.com, their corporate page, and be able to find an annual filing there as well. So that's a tool that could be useful for you at some point in time in your academic career. Let me go ahead and get out of there. Stop the share. Let's go back to our notes. So that's just a little side note there that you guys can use. And make sure we're still recording. Okay, good. Okay, limited liability structure. Oh, I know what happened. I got to bring that down. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, well. Byers has already noted that the limited liability organizations, they can form as the following organization types. Okay, so you can have limited liability in a corporation. Well, that'd be an INC. You can have a limited liability company, a limited liability partnership, or a limited liability or a limited partnership. Now, you see a lot of times the limited liability partnerships and limited partnerships. Those are like doctor's offices, law firms, stuff like that. So the type of business, if you ever start one, do a little research and see what structure you should set it up as legally. But when I used to have a nonprofit that I had started and I ran for about 10 years, and I had a board of directors and we did all kinds of neat things, but I had to keep up with the legal side of it. And we were a nonprofit, so we didn't have to do our SEC filings. So churches and nonprofits, they don't file those, but there was a sense of limited liability. I could only be sued up to a certain portion because I was the president of it, but I wasn't legally liable for all of the finances of it. It was liable for its own financial standing. And we just went backward. Okay, there are different types of organizations, and they're designed to reduce the financial exposure of those who manage, own, found, or invest in that particular business. I need to point out to you that these do not remove the legal responsibility required for sound corporate governance. Had I practiced unethical and illegal corporate governance, I would be held liable before the courts. So that doesn't remove that. And this is really what happened to Enron. There was some bad stuff done in the way it was being governed. They were scamming some people, and the senior leadership did wind up before the judge. And I want to say one or two of them wound up doing some jail time. So you have to be careful. That's why we need to follow the laws. Remember, legally, we must follow the laws. Ethically, we can do more than the laws. And so there's the ethical side. This class is touching on both, but really emphasis on the ethics. We can go above and beyond the laws. They do not encourage investors by limiting, or pardon me, they do encourage investors by limiting the financial risk associated with that business. So if we've got a for-profit corporation and we want investors, them knowing that they're able to invest without exposing themselves to any further loss than what they invest, it makes people more comfortable in investing. If it was the reverse, if the investors had to bear the entire burden or a larger portion of it, we wouldn't have investors. The status of these companies that these companies have is granted by the state through the submission of numerous forms and documents. And trust me, these documents can be a headache. There are lawyers that specialize in corporate business. I have taken courses in grad school on corporate law, but when I set up an organization, I go and I use an actual corporate attorney. I use a corporate attorney because the paperwork is so nuanced. Once it's set up, I know enough about it that I'm able usually to keep up with most of the paperwork, but there are still some areas where I'm going to want to turn to a lawyer on because it can be rather complicated. Now, the socializing financial loss. Byers and Stanbury pointed out that socializing financial loss includes amortizing it or spreading it out over society in general so the owners do not absorb it individually. Taken in this light, these businesses are permitted to exist and function by society itself. There is a unspoken, implicit sort of agreement between society and business. We give you the ability to exist. We do that by, one, structuring laws in a certain way so you can have a legal framework to work within. Two, by being customers and patrons. And three, allowing you to be in our community. So we as businesses, as business owners, actually get our mandate to be able to have that business from our communities. Therefore, I think it's only ethical to return back through corporate social responsibility a good way of interacting with them in a way that benefits the local community. This creates a quid pro quo relationship between the companies and society, meaning that the company has a responsibility to the society that granted its existence. That's why scandals are so big. If a company has got a scandal, it hits the community. And many times there are segments in the community that are really hurt and bothered by it because they realize they give the permission for that company to exist. And here's that company doing something illegal or unethical. And it makes them, well, mistrust them. So this is a quid pro quo relationship here. What you got the business corporations in the center. Outside of that, you got the employees. See, our business wouldn't exist without employees. You have the government. Well, this is where we have the regulation from SEC, FDA, and the various different regulatory bodies. They give us permission to exist. The environment. This is where we get natural resources from. The community. They give us that agreement, that ability to have a business. They also form as customers, which are on the other side of this graph here. And then you got the media. I'll tell you why the media is considered a stakeholder. Because one, we open up a business, it may be a big deal, and the media wants to cover it. One. Two, we really see great profits, and our investors are seeing a good return on their investment. The media reports it. Or maybe there's a scandal, and the media reports it. So they are really interconnected with business. And remember, I'll be posting these online after this course with the video. I really wish I could see the whole screen here, but a corporation's responsibility and ethics. Your textbook noted that there has been a philosophical question surrounding the extent of a corporation's responsibility. So is it only extended to the investors or society at large? If we have a company and we are in the C-suite or the board of directors, our responsibility, is it only to the investors? or is it also to society? That's the question that has to be answered here. And we're going to do that by looking at a couple of case studies, which you have the actual files for, and you need to read them, but I'm going to go through them briefly here in class. In 1919, the Ford Motor Company was in court concerning this very issue. The Michigan Supreme Court found that shareholder primacy was to be upheld. This meant that the company had to be run in a manner that would bring the highest amount of profit to its shareholders. Ultimately, this impacted the company's ability to provide a better product for a lower price, yet Henry Ford maintained that he and his company could provide significant dividends and produce a better, cheaper product for the public. So I'll tell you a little bit more about what happened. You have the Dodge brothers. Now, you've heard about Dodge vehicles. They're a company, and you've heard of Ford. Well, originally, the Dodge brothers were actually with Henry Ford in the Ford Motor Company, and they were all involved in one company. They were investors. The Dodge brothers were investors. They were involved in the company, and they thought that Ford should be running Ford, the company, as the best way in order to gain more profit for the investors. Ford thought, hey, wait a minute, I can actually make these cars cheaper. I can make them in a way that we can sell them at a lower price and more people can get them. Because at that time, only people that had a lot of money could get the cars. And so he said, we can get more cars out there and get more people driving. And Dodge said, wait a minute, you're going to reduce the price? So you're going to reduce my profit. And Ford thought we need to really keep an eye and help out the regular general public, the people that aren't making as much money as us, and provide them a good product that's quality, that's reliable, and affordable. And so Ford was pushing towards benefiting society. The Dodge brothers, they wanted Ford, the company, benefiting them, the investors. So they sued Henry Ford. They go before a judge, and this case comes out. Now, we have shareholder primacy. That has become foundational when we look at how organizations should exist. So for many years, organizations sought for one thing, and that was to increase the profit so the investors could make more money. There are still companies that practice that approach today. However, over the past few decades, we've seen a push more and more towards how can companies benefit society? What responsibilities, ethically and legally, do companies have for and towards society? And so that's where we're diving into next. So was Ford attempting to practice an early form of CSR? I think maybe he was. He didn't call it corporate social responsibility, but he just in his business mind thought if we produce these more economically, sell them at a cheaper price, more people are going to benefit in the communities that receive our product. Many other businesses at that time, they were solely focused on profit. Even today, that still happens. Ford was taking a novel stance by thinking about the public. But in the end, Ford was legally forced to give up on his plans to give more of this product and to provide more money for society. He was forced by the courts. So early limited liability. Byers and Stanbury pointed out that it was during this very same trial that the court decided on what seemed like a contrary position. So they made a decision that was dichotomous. In one way, it was a positive, and in one way, it was a negative. And it seemed like it was self-contradictory. The business judgment rule reduced the financial liability commonly carried by owners, managers, and investors. That means that the owners, managers, investors were not legally liable for more than the share that they put into that company. It also meant that the court would not second guess the decisions of the company's managers or directors. And so now a manager and a director, the board of directors could make decisions. So the courts said, Ford, you must focus on shareholder primacy. Put your investors first. But then they turned around and said, but as a court, we're going to pass this other part of a rule that says that we can't get involved with the business decisions. That's up to the owners and the managers and the investors. And so on one side, they're telling Ford what to do as a court, and the other side, they're saying, we shouldn't be telling you what to do. That's what was contradictory about it. Now, I think it was rather pivotal and groundbreaking at the time, both of these ways the decisions were headed. because I think that was the first crack in the armor that led towards CSR becoming something that could occur. So let's now turn to the 1950s and 1960s. Your textbook brought up the return to a profit-focused legal interpretation of the law during that time period within certain jurisdictions. Now, as you may already know, you have the Supreme Court, and their jurisdiction is the United States, but not the totality necessarily. It's when everything goes through the lower courts, all the way up to the district courts, and then it can finally get to the Supreme Court. So they have to wait until a case goes all the way through the other court systems. Now, in the Michigan, we have a Michigan Supreme Court. Every state does. We also have local courts, and we also have courts at different levels and for different types of things, criminal courts and civil courts. And so the legal system is really divided up into many, many different boxes. Okay. So back to the slide. This seemed to temporarily suspend the need for organizations to consider the general public. And so the whole idea of corporate social responsibility or being concerned about society seemed to be erased yet again in the 1950s and 1960s. But in 1968, there was a change in the air when the courts ruled in the Shilinsky versus Wrigley case. Now, that's another case you have, a case study. You have that to read this week, but let's go into it just for a moment. In this case, the installation of some stadium lights was at the very forefront of a legal battle. On one side, there was the stadium investors who wanted brighter stadium lights. On the other side, there was the stadium owner who did not want all of that proposed light pollution to negatively affect the local community. So what we have here, the investors, they want the bright lights so they can have more baseball games at night and increase the profit. The owner said, I don't want the lights because it's going to cause light pollution and it might increase crime within that area. And I don't want to increase crime in the area. I don't want to be the guy that causes this neighborhood to become a crime-ridden environment. So here again, we see that it was the owners who wanted to err on the side of the public and the investors who wanted more profit. We can see the progression towards corporate social responsibility in the Shilinsky case. The owners wanted to think of the public, while the investors were only concerned about profit. Yet ultimately, in this case, the community had to endure the lights eventually. Because what happened is Wrigley, who owned the field, the whole time he owned that stadium, he never installed the bright lights. He never gave in to the investors. But he got up in years and he sold that property. And the new owners bought it, and the first thing they did, they installed the bright stadium lights. And so the investors ultimately got their bright lights, but not until Wrigley sold the stadium. So yet we see CSR kind of on the table. Once again, it's not as we know it today, but we see the seed of CSR developing. In 2014, the U.S. Supreme Court found in favor of Hobby Lobby, saying that a company that is considered a closely held corporation or a privately held company, so they have 100 or less investors, could make decisions against the investor based on moral or religious grounds. If you recall correctly, I want to say this had to do because Hobby Lobby, the owners and the main investors, some of the investors, the owners particularly, they're very religious. And they refuse to sell certain items in their store. They refuse to have this open on certain days. They made some clear rules. This is what we're going to do as a company. We're not going to cave in. Okay, now, investors, of course, they wanted more. They want more profits. Investors always do. So we have to ask a few questions. Should a publicly traded company, now remember, Hobby Lobby is a closely held company, but a publicly traded company, one that's on the stock exchange, should that business enforce its own morality? Should a business that is publicly traded, so anybody can invest in there? It's not just people that have the same religious belief. It may be people from other religions or people without religion. Should they invest in a company that's going to make decisions that are contrary to what they think ethically and morally? Now, let's turn this around. What about a closely held company? If we have a closely held company, should we be able to make decisions based on our sense of morality as owners? Whose rights do we need to consider here? The rights of the community to be able to have freedom of religion and freedom of speech and freedom of these ideas and concepts? Or as a business, the freedom to only have a business that works within that particular framework? It's really kind of one of these issues where come into a moral or ethical dilemma where do we err on the side of the people with belief, wanting to impose their belief on others outside, or the outside wanting to be free from the imposition of belief, and at the same time willing to allow a closely held company to have their beliefs? Where's the happy ground? Byers and Stanbury noted that the debate on CSR has two particular sides. You have the pro-social views and the pro-corporate views. The pro-social views. From this standpoint, the studies indicate, and when I say studies, I'm talking academic, peer-reviewed, scientific research articles, indicate that organizations can increase their profit through being mindful of society's well-being. I've seen studies that actually indicate that a company that puts corporate social responsibility policies into practice without greenwashing can see an increase in their profits, but it's a gradual increase that continues in a sustainable way. So over 3 years, you go from a little increase to a significant increase, and you're able to sustain that in a longer duration of time. The halo effect, this is what occurs when customers or consumers see the CSR initiatives and desire to do even more business with that organization. They see that organization as being like a saint. You know, they have the halos on all the saints, meaning, oh, they're really good, they're really wonderful, they're upstanding, and it creates this halo effect. And consumers see that. It's like Patagonia. If you really are about environmental protection, you might be really interested in buying nothing but Patagonia because they're really focused on saving the environment. And so you see that, you know that about them. You see the halo that they have. You fall subject to the halo effect. And now you do more business with them. That's the halo effect at play. Now, pro-corporate views, as Byers and Stanbury pointed out, Milton Friedman. Now, for those of you who've heard me talk before about Milton Friedman, you know I am not the biggest fan of his. Society, the way society is here in this Western nation of America, the way our economy is, was heavily influenced by two people. Adam Smith, who wrote a book way back in the 18th century called The Wealth of Nations. And it's actually an interesting book. It's not really advocating for the exact form of capitalism we have, but close, but with a little bit more leniency than what we experience. A little bit more room for social ability, if you would say, if I recall Adam Smith's work. Now, Milton Friedman, he took a hardline stance towards capitalism. So if you think of a spectrum, on my left, all the way over here, my shaking hand, you have socialism. Now, when I say the word socialism, many people, they conflate communism with socialism. My mother's generation was real bad about that. First of all, communism is a totally different barrel of monkeys, and communism has been proven to fail, okay, multiple times. On paper, it's a great idea. In practice, it doesn't work. It never works. Socialism, there are about 5 different kinds of socialism, ranging from a communistic form of socialism, and then progressively all the way over until you get to a very capitalistic form of socialism. So countries up in the Scandinavian area, so Norway and Sweden and these socialistic countries, if you look at the global happiness index, and there is such a thing, they rate in the top, very top levels of that index. Their citizens are happy, they're content, they love being in that country. And their tax rate isn't really that high. We here in America, we think, oh my goodness, they got such a high tax rate. It's only 26%. And that's really not much more than what we pay over here. But it's just this idea of increasing taxes. Americans are really against that. But with that little increase in taxes, what they do, let's say like in Norway, is your bachelor degree is totally paid for. If you get married, or you don't maybe not even get married, but you wind up having a child, The mother can have up to a year off from work and she's paid the whole time. The father can have 6 months off and he's paid the whole time. Okay, so they've got these things. Healthcare, they don't worry about healthcare. They have a socialized medical system. Now, socialized medicine has its ups and its downs. The good side is everybody has access to it. The bad side is sometimes you wait longer. Um, so there's always positives and negatives to it. But here in America, Milton Friedman, he really drove us into capitalism without the socialist angle. So even in the socialistic countries that we think of, they're not as socialistic as you might think. Because Norway, Sweden, they're very capitalistic. You can own a business, you can make profit, you can own intellectual property, you can own property, real estate. But there's the social aspect where everybody contributes and try to benefit the society as a whole. And so it's a very moderate form of socialism. Milton Friedman and Adam Smith, they're the reasons why the American economic system is really set up the way that it is. They promoted a view that says that CSR initiatives can impede organizational profit. So to Milton Friedman, CSR limits the ability of a company to generate profit, or should I say maximal profit. This view separates the organization from social good. It almost creates a system where we legally give status to these companies as being entities. So the McDonald's Corporation is seen as a person legally, just like you are. They have rights and they got privileges and all these things. If they're seen as a person, why aren't they trying to better the whole mass of people? Why should we limit them from helping others? So I think that CSR doesn't limit profitability. Like I said, I've seen studies where CSR actually increases profitability. It's just over more of a long-term type duration. So time does change everything. The authors noted that as the years went by, Milton Friedman's pro-corporate ideology began to lose public support. And you see most people who really support Milton Friedman's form of the economy being in a very conservative political group, okay? They tend to be more conservative. Matter of fact, that's one of the defining features of political conservatism. You can see some Democrats that are economically conservative, and you can see some Republicans that are economically more liberal. Which approach is correct? Should we have a society where our businesses are kind of bound ethically to help society out because they're a functioning member of society? Or should they be focused solely on profits? And that's not a question we're going to be able to answer in this class. This is something that society as a whole has to answer. It's that shift of the Overton window of the ethical norms, the social norms that changes over time. There's been a shift sliding over towards capitalism, but with more of a socialized undertone. And I think in time we'll wind up being similar to, not exactly like, but similar to Norway and Finland. So here's the argument. The textbook turned to recent court cases to demonstrate the thought that many professionals currently have. And that is that removing the duty held by corporations to increase the profits of their shareholders would lead to a reduction of corporate accountability. But really, is that true? See, I don't think it is. I think that by changing their focus on profit and using the triple bottom line approach, which includes CSR, includes the environment, includes things like that, while including profit, that I think is where most organizations are headed towards. Many are already using the TBL. Those that aren't, I think in time will, because they're going to start seeing these companies that apply the TBL approach as being sustainably profitable. Sometimes companies push so hard to have that profit increase that they do these initiatives that happen, boom, instantly. They get a big boost in their profit, but it's not sustainable. It shoots down immediately right after, and now their investors are losing the gains they had just made. I think that CSR really provides a way that we can sustainably increase the profits while also benefiting society. Once again, Anybody can feel free to disagree with me on that. It's just when I look through the research as a researcher, I try to find the pros and the cons. I want people from both camps. I want to know the people that agree with the thought process. I want to read people's work, their studies that disagree with the process, so I can use critical thinking skills to determine what I think about the process. So when I've arrived at my conclusion, I've looked at the positives and the negatives from both sides, and I will continue to do so because just because I've done this for a number of years doesn't mean I have actually got to a point where I say, yes, this is the right approach. I say, I think this is the way we're headed. I say, this is the way I think we should go. But ultimately, only time will truly tell us. Current laws in America mandate corporations to be accountable to their investors, while CSR has been and remains mainly in the realm of ethics. Now, I'm going to back up for a second here, literally. Okay, now that we got the sight gag out of the way. And I'm going to get into some political stuff, but I want to preface it. This is an academic environment. We are supposed to be able to talk about things that make us feel comfortable and things that make us feel uncomfortable. So we do this in an academic way. I'm not here to downplay or denigrate anybody's political or religious views in the least. I'm here as a professor to present ideas for you now to take that and use critical thinking skills and determine where you stand as an individual. I cannot tell you where you stand. I cannot tell you where I think you should stand because I'm only here to give you information and to help you critically think, not to guide the actual outcome of that critical thought process. I hope that's understood. We're in America, we elect a new president every 4 years. And according to the Constitution, an individual can serve 2 terms. So that'd be a total of 8 years. Outside of that, we're continually replacing our top individual. Okay. The Democrats tend to be more socially minded. And when I use the word socially minded, I'm not talking in a communistic way because, as I tried to explain a moment ago, communism is not socialism. Okay. Socialism is its own entity that comprises from a communistic point of view and approach to a capitalistic approach. So just socialism in general, benefiting a society. Depending on which party is in control of the government, our nation either enacts laws that are more social or laws that are less social. And we see this every time we get a new president. Okay. So some of the things we're talking about CSR, and even if we were to talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right now, these are seen as being bad things by our particular current government. That's where they are, okay? But I, as a researcher, I look at things like CSR and I say, but it only makes sense. If a corporation has the legal status of an individual, then should they not have the legal obligation to look after their fellow individuals? And when it comes to DEI, I say this. Now, remember, I am a theologian. That's why I'm able to teach philosophy. Most world religions have at their core and their concepts this idea of I need to do to other people what I want done to me. Okay, so it's in Christianity, it's in Islam, it's in Buddhism, it's in the major world religions. It's a foundational tenet. So if I'm going to treat you the way I want to be treated, I'm actually practicing CSR. I'm looking out for your well-being. I'm trying to treat you in a way that accepts you as an individual because I want to be treated as an individual. I'm looking out to treat you equitably because I want to be treated equitably. I'm looking to include you and not exclude you into the category of the others because I want to be included. And so by doing that maxim found in these world religions, I'm actually applying DEI in my approach. So DEI is not contrary to world religions. It's not contrary to individuals, how they see themselves and how they want to be treated. It only comes down now to, do we see others as truly being in a different category? If so, are we seeing them as less than human? And unfortunately, humans have done this for centuries, for millennia. Think back to American slavery. Okay, American slavery happens. It's this whole thing. The whites are superior. And no, that's not how I think. I don't think whites are superior. I don't think anyone is superior. I think humanity in general is wonderful and horrible at the same time. So I do not agree with that approach. But so much of the founding of this country was based on this idea that the rich white males who had the power, they wanted to retain that power. And so if you were a female or if you were a person of color, they put you into the category of the others. I disagree with that personally. I don't live my life that way. I include and welcome everybody, but we still see the effects. So in the mid 1900s, the mid 19th century, should I say, slavery ends. Abraham Lincoln does the Emancipation Proclamation, sets the slaves free, and now we begin Jim Crow. The Jim Crow era was an attempt to still keep people of color pushed out into a camp of being the others. They were less than us. They were less than, their value was less than me as a white male. A woman was kept down and pushed out, being less than the value of a white male. So in the early 20th century, what do we find? We find the suffragette movement, where women were fighting for the right to vote, to own property, to open bank accounts, to be individuals, to get educations. We see in the mid of the 20th century, we see the civil rights movement leading to the Civil Rights Act being passed. But Jim Crow was still there. Jim Crow was not a person. Jim Crow was an ideology that led to separate drinking fountains if you were a person of color, that you had to sit in a different part of the bus, that you couldn't walk on the same side of the street as me. That mentality was still being pushed, and in some places is still today being pushed. I absolutely abhor that because I think all people are human beings. And as such, we need to treat each other as equals. Okay? I have colleagues all over the world of every culture, every ethnic origin, who hold graduate work, that hold doctorates, that do research, and their research is so viable and valuable and useful. I don't look down on anybody because of where they come from, what religion they practice, what gender they are, because I've learned that if I do that, I limit myself from having the joy of meeting and learning from these other people myself. And so that's a little discussion I wanted to get into because I myself, this classroom is not a place where I tell you, you have to accept people. I'm here to give you the concepts. Now, there are some that would not want me to talk about DEI, not here at the school, but throughout this country. I still talk about it because treating people ethically is the right thing to do. To the extent that you do it and you see it, well, that's really up to you to decide. But I'm going to treat people how I want to be treated. Okay, enough of my little tantrum at the moment. So is there a solution? Byers and Stanbury pointed out that many organizations believe that CSR can aid in their long-term financial growth. And the authors pointed out that many CSR positive organizations have increased their profits sustainably. And I've seen some of these studies. It's amazing. Maybe the solution lies somewhere in the middle zone between CSR and profit. I don't think a company should be so CSR minded that they neglect its duty to generate profit for its investors. I think there's a place, that balance between the two, where we can balance our drive to increase our profit margin and do social good. I think that there's that balance point in there. And I've seen some of these things we're talking about applied in industries that you would think would not apply it. And my dissertation, to get my PhD, I did a 2-year study looking at the ethical treatment of women working as exotic entertainers, so in gentlemen's clubs. I wanted to see how the managers were treating them. And so I interviewed quite a number of managers, and I did a scientific study. And I found in most cases, the managers were already applying the concepts of DEI in how they were managing the dancers. And in knowing and meeting some of the dancers and hearing their responses to how they felt under that particular manager was amazing because the more that manager looked out for them, the more that dancer liked working at that club for that manager. She worked harder. She felt valued. And it was actually a wonderful thing to see applied. And then I said, if we're able to do this in that industry, which is usually seen as kind of seedy and deviant. Why? But it's succeeding over here. Why can't we apply those principles in mainstream companies? Why are women still being paid significantly less than men in same positions with same qualifications? Why are we treating people of other ethnic backgrounds and origin differently? If this deviant type business can succeed, why can't other businesses succeed? And the profits come along with that, because the more that your people want to be there and work, the more they feel valued and respected. Studies show the more they work and the more they put their effort and their intellect and all their being into that business, the more your profits are going to increase. And so it balances out between the two. That's what I'm trying to get at here. I think the point that we need to get to is a balance between social good and profit. We can get to a point where we're doing both, and the TBL is a wonderful tool to help do that. Now let's turn our attention to the environment and corporate personhood. Byers and Stanberry discussed that the environment is unable to fight for itself in court, but a corporation can. Corporate personhood is the idea that a corporation stands apart from the people who make it up, thus giving it rights and privileges of personhood. So if we have a company and it's called XYZ Incorporated, well, one, it's made up of everybody that's inside there, but it's so much more than that. It's a complex idea. Complexity theory comes to play here. And this company begins to be its own entity. So what if the founding members leave? What if the president leaves? What if the board of directors leave and others come in? That company still remains with its identity. It remains as in a form of a personhood sort of situation going on. So it's like the ship of Theseus. I don't know if you're familiar, but the ship of Theseus, it's this philosophical idea where you got this ship, and if I take a plank off and I put a new one on, and then I take off another plank and put it on, and I remove a mast and I put a new one on, and I keep doing this over years until finally every single part on that ship has been changed. Is that ship still the ship of Theseus? Or has it become something else? Because if I've kept all the parts I've taken off the ship and I've replaced, I can build another ship over here. So which one is the ship of Theseus? So now I'm going to twist your mind a little bit more. Every 7 years, the human body has a whole new set of cells. Your body generates new cells, gets rid of the old. Your skeletal system, your integral system, so your skin, all of your organs, your brain cells, everything. Every 7 years, it is literally an entirely, biologically speaking, different matter. Are you still the same person every 7 years? Or do you cease being you and become somebody else? Well, if you remain you, then a company will remain a company even if you changed out its leadership and everybody working there. Just like the ship of Theseus would still be the ship of Theseus even if you changed out every part. So I go back to the whole concept, what works for me as an individual should work for society, should work for the company, the corporation. And if we're going to have corporate personhood, then we have to allow for these changes to happen and yet the identity to remain the same. There has been some progress in the legal system to grant the environment rights. There has been some progress, not enough, but some. Earth jurisprudence is one such movement. It basically gives the environment the ability to stand up in court for itself, well, through other people. But people begin to see that animals have rights. So chicken farms are not supposed to be abusing the chickens. Cattle ranches are not supposed to be abusing the cattle. I have a dog. I should not be abusing my dog. I should be taking care of him. He has rights because I agree he should have rights. He may not be a human being, but he has a form of personality. And I joke around at times that he has a doganality, but he has an individuality all of his own. And because of that, he's an entity. And as such, should have rights. The environment doesn't have a conscience, but it should be seen to have some form of rights, I think. So we don't overforest, so we don't overpollute, so we don't do these things that are really deadly for the environment. Ultimately, we should be doing this because we need it for us as humans. We need this environment for us. My son is 21. When he has children, I'll have grandkids. What kind of world am I going to leave them if I think that we should deplete all the forests and overpollute? I'm going to leave them a world that they can't even live in. Now we're going to get to the tragedy of the commons. And this is the beginning of the extra stuff I'm going to share with you here today. Byers and Stanberry defined the tragedy of the commons as the idea that people generally use as much of the free resources as they can without regard of the needs of others or for the long-term environmental effects. In other words, there's a lake. I'm fishing in the lake, but I live in the area. I catch some fish. I eat them at home. My family, my kids eat them. What I have extra, I sell to the local community. I generate some income. The fish are good in this lake. There's plenty of fish. So a company moves in and sets up an industrial fishing operation. They overfish the lake. They take all the fish. Now, myself and the other people that live nearby, we go and we fish, but we don't catch anything. I no longer can earn a little bit of extra money selling fish. I can't get fish to feed myself and my family because the resource has all been used up. That's the tragedy of the commons. Some say that governments must make sure that businesses do not misuse natural resources. And I have to ask the question, if we could trust people and therefore businesses to use things in moderation, the government wouldn't need to step in to set up laws and rules and legislation to protect the environment. We would already be doing that. My heritage on my dad's side is French, Micmac, and Malicet. Now, Micmac and Malicet are two Native American tribes from the Algonquin Nation. I am maybe what, 132nd, 116th. I forget. I have to do the math because it was two grandparents. I think it's 116th. Native American. I was not raised in a Native American community, but my father did impart some things to me, and he was not raised in a Native American community, but he had some things imparted to him just through the family way of teaching, that social development that we have within our families. And I refuse to leave a campsite worse than I find it. I try to make it better than I find it. I don't think that I need to be leaving my trash all over the place. And I try to live in a way that is more harmonious with my environment. Now, I'm not as successful as my ancestors, but I try to be more successful than I would be otherwise. And I do this automatically. I'm not out to overuse things with the environment. If we could take that approach, we wouldn't need the government making laws about the environment. But because human nature is so prone to the problems with greed and selfishness, that we have a tendency inherently to overuse things. We find a gold mine. We try to get every single atom of gold out. We find a coal deposit. We try to remove every single bit of coal. We find petroleum. Same thing. We try to extract everything. Why? Because now I can make money. I can make profit with that. I have an I disorder. Instead of thinking, maybe we should leave some there for the future, or that maybe we shouldn't use all this natural resource because it's bad for the environment. That doesn't come to my mind because I have this I disorder. Overuse of natural resources is an unsustainable corporate practice. If we use a natural resource, let's say mahogany, a hardwood called mahogany, beautiful wood. But if I make all my furniture with mahogany, I have my house all filled with mahogany, I make furniture for people, and it's all out of mahogany, and I use up all the mahogany, how can anybody ever have anything mahogany ever again? One, I've just limited the future from being able to enjoy the beauty of mahogany. Two, mahogany, it's a tree. It has leaves. It takes carbon dioxide that I exhale, and it transforms it into carbon wait, no, into oxygen. I had to remember my chemistry for a minute. Turns it into oxygen. It's a wonderful process called photophosphorylation or photosynthesis. It's a wonderful natural occurrence. But if I use all of the trees, how are we going to be able to breathe? The oceans, because of the algae and the plankton and all that, they convert CO2 into oxygen also. If we abuse our oceans, how are we going to get oxygen from them? Humans need oxygen. We need clean water to drink. We need oxygen. We need food. But if we overuse the resources in our environment, we won't have that anymore. What happens then? Species extinction. So we need to think about the long term as a species. And I think that the tragedy of the commons happens way more often than we ever want to admit. Now, with the idea of the tragedy of the commons, it falls under what's known as systems archetypes. And I'm going to introduce you to all of the systems archetypes today. What we have here is the archetypes, and we're going to go through them one by one briefly. Drifting goals. Now, the way these are used is you see these diagrams on the left side of the page. If I take a company and I graph out the company, and I'm able to take this diagram, I find which one mostly resembles the organization. And I can overlay that. Now I've got a way of understanding that company, the potential problems, and the issues that might arise. And so these are archetypes. We use them. These are not maxims into a company must be exactly like this, but which one is it most like? Or we can use it in decision making. A decision I'm trying to make is X, Y, and Z. I look at systems archetypes and I determine where it falls. It helps me look at consequences. There's something called the law of unintended consequences. Simply put, we make a decision, we are not even thinking about a possible consequence, and it happens, and boom, suddenly it's there, and we didn't intend for it to happen. And it's surprise, oh my goodness, why is it happening to me? Well, if we stop thinking linearly, unfortunately, the human mind does think linearly primarily, and we learn to think in a non-linear way, which is how reality actually happens, we can actually foresee and forecast most of the consequences that are going to come our direction. Now, the human being is trying to learn to ride a bicycle. You're out there trying to learn to ride a bicycle. You make a mistake. The consequence comes in the form of immediate feedback. You fall off the bike, you get hurt. You associate in your mind, if I do that again, I could fall off and get hurt again. So if I take that action, make that decision, I have that consequence. I can connect the two because the action and the consequence occur real close to each other in time. Most of the time, our action or decision occurs and the consequence doesn't happen for days, weeks, months, or even years into the future. And when it happens, our brain doesn't connect that consequence to this action because we're not thinking non-linearly. And so in that process, I don't connect them. So now the law of unintended consequences seems to govern, but really the consequence was foreseeable. How do we foresee this? We got to try to evaluate as much as we can. And systems archetypes help us to identify different problems that could lead to certain outcomes. They could be positive or negative, but at least we know about them in advance. So drifting goals. In a drifting goal archetype, a gap between the goal and the current reality can be resolved by taking corrective action or lowering the goal. The critical difference is that lowering the goal immediately closes the gap, whereas corrective actions usually take time. So this is explaining to me that if I've got a goal and an action, do I want to hurry up the corrective action and make it immediate, or do I want to make it play out over time? What's going to be the best thing working for me in this situation? Okay. Now you're going to have access to this, so you can go through it in more detail. And there's also a lot of writing, and I would recommend the author Peter Senge, spelled Senge. He's a professor at MIT. He teaches systems theory and systems thinking, which is a subset of systems theory, which all fall under complexity theory, which really explain how the environment, the world, the cosmos, and humans and our social groups and businesses really function. It's not the only way to understand it, but it really explains so much of it that it really is a good tool to fall back onto. So escalation. In the escalation archetype, one party takes actions that are perceived by the other as a threat. The other party responds in a similar manner, increasing the threat to A and resulting in more threatening actions by A. The reinforcing loop is traced out by following the outline in the figure 8 produced by the two balancing loops. Okay, so this is a causal loop design. That's what these are. They're causal loop designs. We're looking for the causations and the feedback. You have balancing loops and you have reinforcement loops. This is the short version. I'm not going to give you a lot today. But here what's saying is if I reach out and I threaten somebody with a punch and I hit them, they're going to react by punching me, which now makes me want to punch them again. They punch me again. Now we're punching each other continually. It's what happens when nations go to war with each other, is the escalation system archetype at play. Now we can look at this. We got to find, where do we get off this cycle? What do we do to stop this process? And these systems archetypes can help us find those things. Now, fixes that fail. In fixes that fail situation, a problem symptom cries out for resolution. A solution is quickly implemented that alleviates the symptom, but the unintended consequence of the fix exasperates the problem. Over time, the problem or symptom returns to its previous level or becomes worse. So this is the cure causing the problem in many ways. We got something that we need to fix. We do the first quick thing we can. We don't think it through, and it winds up causing us to go into a cycle of repetition, of always having that same exact problem over and over. It's also where we get into the thing of the status quo, which is applying that same solution over and over instead of accepting the chaos of the moment and allowing a new solution to emerge. Growth and underinvestment. Now, I'm going to go through these really brief for you because you have access to it. We're not going to go through them all. But here, what we have is we're looking at the correlation between a system that grows and what happens if we don't invest enough into it. Where's the play happen there? And so this is useful, especially in like financial type situations and systems. Limits to success. So in here, what we're having is we want to improve our performance. And we encounter something that causes us to slow down, and we got to find ways to get past it and rise up. So we have limits to our success. How successful can we be? We got to know what limits there are. And we got to also understand that the success itself can become a limitation at some point. Shifting the burden. Okay, so here, shifting the burden is literally the same thing as moving the goalposts. It's a logical fallacy. And here I say, my goal is right here at this point. But then I realize, hey, there's some issues going on. No, I'm gonna have to move that to a different place. And I move the goal down the way a bit. And I keep moving it. Or I'm trying to lead people and I say, here's your goal. And they start reaching it. I'm like, wait, I don't want them to reach it. I want them to be dependent on me. So I move the goal down a little further. They get close to it. I move it again. That's a logical fallacy and a system archetype. Success to the successful. Okay, sometimes it seems like the people that actually succeed are the ones that are guaranteed to succeed. Well, there are some reasons for it. And here we find them in this very systems archetype. And lastly, tragedy of the commons, which is what we already talked about the lake and the fishing. Okay, so now you've got some extra tools. You have the SEC Edgar tool that you can use to look at organizations, their annual reports, and you have these systems archetypes. And I've introduced you to causal loop designs, which if you want to know more about that, I would love to teach you, and feel free to ask, and we can have some office time, an office hour or whatever, a meeting, an appointment. I can teach you a little bit more about causal loop designs. They're so effective. In my last relationship, I broke up with her like 3 years ago or so. It was so traumatic. So for 3 years I was with her, and it was a bad situation. I use causal loop designs and systems archetypes to help me identify A, where I was making mistakes, and B, where she was causing problems, because no one was innocent, okay? I wasn't guilt-free. I was causing problems in the relationship. But these tools help me understand where I could work to improve myself as a human being and set up safeguards to protect myself from the things that she was doing that were more abusive. And so these are some really useful tools. Does anybody have any questions today? Just remember that this is a college class. And so I, as your professor, will be introducing concepts that maybe you agree with or maybe you don't. Don't be offended. We're in academia. We're supposed to look at the positives and the negatives, use critical thinking to determine where we ourselves stand. I can't tell you where you stand. I can't tell you what you believe. I can only present you the information and the tools, and it's up to you to apply them as you know that you should. And kind of like religion. I myself don't follow religion. I used to. I grew up Pentecostal. I was actually a Baptist pastor for 10 years. But for personal reasons, I left that and I moved myself out of the faith also because I had some ethical things that I had issues with and I had to deal with them. That was my decision. I will never tell my students that they shouldn't have faith, that they shouldn't be religious or whatever. No, I can't do that. I will support you in what you say you need to be focused on because you yourself, you know. And then I'm just here to support you in that process, whatever it might be. So I'm not here to change you. I'm here to give you information, tools, to be a resource. So with that said, we're done with class today. If you do wind up having questions as you start getting into your homework this week and reading through the material, send me an email, okay? All right, you all have a great day and try to stay warm out there.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Hey, you have a great day.